go ahead and get started with introductions. Again, just wanted to welcome you to the GIS Standards orientation. This is being presented for consultants that are performing Water Development Office projects. In terms of introductions, I'm Mabel Jones. I'm a project manager with the River Basin Planning section. Mike Robertson is also here. He's a project manager for the office within River Basin Planning. Those of you who have been working with our office for a number of years might notice that Jody is not here. She retired last spring, and so we're carrying on the great work that she started. Tony Bergantino is also with us today. He is with the Water Research Data System at the University of Wyoming. He's a key partner with our office in terms of technical expertise, maintaining all of the information, data, records, reports on our webpage, and the list goes on and on of the support that Tony provides for the planning section and the office as a whole. So to start out with, our office initiated an effort in 2016 to improve management of the GIS data, which is developed for Level 1 and Level 2 planning projects. Working with a multi-agency steering group, core data sets, which are key to the business needs of our agency as well as other agencies, were defined. From our perspective, the core data sets support understanding of water use, water supply, and water project feasibility. We do appreciate your participation today, even if you have attended previous webinars. Implementation of the data modernization and compiling the incoming project data has resulted in fine-tuning and updating data templates and our data standards. Currently, we're on version 3.1 of the data standards and the templates. So for 2021, the updates included refining our attribute domains in the geodatabases, updates to the technical memo, and just trying to fine-tune language to help consultants deliver the projects based on the standards. So today we will cover the current GIS standards, where you can access the templates and tools, provide you with tips so your data deliverables meet standards, and then we'll open up for questions and answers at the end. In regards to the GIS standards, we'll jump into this first, since following the standards will ensure your spatial data collected during the project is compiled so that deliverables provide the data in the correct format the first time. To follow the standards, it is important to note and understand the spatial data requirements in the contract specifications, what core data is, or also known as the data required for your project, and then also resources available to help ensure core data sets meet Wyoming Water Development Office standards. So the spatial data requirements are outlined in the contract specifications. Under section C2B, we recommend that your contracts be shared with the person on the consultant team who's going to be doing the GIS work, if the project principals have not done so already, because there's a lot of information in the contract that will help your GIS person out. The first section of the contract talks about feature mapping. Here it addresses that the consultant should acquire the appropriate GeoDatabase template for feature mapping from the Geospatial Hub prior to completing GIS work. We do recommend that you go get those templates early in the project so that you're working with them throughout the life of the project and not trying to retrofit the data into the templates right before you need to deliver your draft products to the office. There are 5 different GeoDatabase templates on the website, and they'll be specific to your project type, whether it's a municipal water plan, an irrigation plan, or otherwise, and we'll talk more about those 5 different types of templates later. Core data and auxiliary data are also addressed in the contract. Core data are those features which fit within one of the feature classes in the GeoDatabase templates. This is whether you have created the data or you have gathered the data from the field. Also, whether you pulled the data in from a previous water development study and are using it on the project. If it fits into one of the templates, it needs to be provided as a deliverable. Core data have a subset of fields that are required in all feature classes. Those include the contract number, the primary consultant, the date modified, and the horizontal accuracy. So those are required for all feature classes. The contract number is required for all records in the data that are added to the geodatabases, and it is on the first page of the contract. It starts with 2 numbers followed by SCS and then followed by a series of numbers, and it's highlighted on the top right of this page. It's important to use the contract number and not confuse that with the RN number that is on the top of each page of the contract. The scope of services also define what auxiliary data sets are. These include features that do not fit within one of the feature classes in the GeoDatabase templates. It might include photos, and so you might have links to photos that you have taken, or it could be seepage areas, or line work or polygons for potential projects, since potential projects are to be delivered as a point layer. The auxiliary data can be linked to the templates or managed separately as needed for project completion. Auxiliary data sets can be submitted as shapefiles, and metadata is required. The next section of the contract is related to formats and standards. Again, metadata is addressed here. We'll talk about that more later in the webinar. The coordinate system is also defined in the contract language and set up in the templates. Specifically, the coordinate system is GCS North American 1983. The final section of the contract as it relates to project requirements relates to the maps or the MPX files. It is defined here that the project GIS deliverables shall be organized in such a way as to easily allow replication of the maps found in the final project report. Current contract language indicates that these should be submitted as MXD files. We will accept ArcPro files for the maps because we know a number of people are starting to go to that. And the next round of contract language will describe using ArcPro or APRX files for your deliverables. Again, the map files need to be saved with relative path names to data sources. And just as a reminder, please look at the contract language before you submit your GIS deliverables. So in the introduction, I mentioned our goal of modernizing and standardizing the data which is being collected as part of water development projects. And as we reviewed the contract language, the concept of core data sets was introduced. The framework for the core data sets in the templates is based on the common sets or groups of data gathered during water development projects. The framework identified 4 different categories of data or data sets: assessment, hydrology, water projects, and water systems. The assessment data set organizes key data related to water use. This may be things like changes over time, ground conditions. So included here are things like irrigated lands, Roskin classification, and available flow. The hydrology data set contains a single feature class on both measured and modeled stream flow data. The water projects data set includes study area boundaries, and also tracks potential projects that are identified in the Water Development Office project. The potential projects includes things like the cost and how these potential projects fit into our funding programs. The water systems data set contains information on the existing built environment, not the potential projects. So this is the existing network to distribute water throughout the system, which includes the conveyances or conduits for moving the water, the structures, things like head gates, pumps, that type of thing, as well as water rights information related to place of use and point of diversion data. Only a subset of these core feature classes are required for your project, and this will be described in a few minutes when we share how to access the templates. So basically, the contract lays out what to do for your project GIS, and we've developed a lot of resources to provide how to do it. So it not only serves your project needs, but has increased utility beyond the life of your project when it becomes part of statewide water development data sets. So much of what you need to know about data delivery and development can be found in the GIS Standards Technical Memo. When you begin your projects, or if you get stuck using the tools or looking for the templates, this is a great place to start. This is a new 2021 version, so it's 3.1. So you'll want to grab this off our web page, even if you've worked with the standards previously, as some of the fields in the templates, as well as other standards, such as the domains, have been updated. In reviewing the document, it has 4 major sections, starting with an introduction. Then there is a section on working with the metadata, where there are the 5 sections which are required are outlined, and also examples are presented of how to do the metadata. Also, the coordinate system is defined in the tech memo. The tech memo also includes a description of the templates, the tools, and the base layers. The GeoDatabase Template section provides download instructions for the map packages for your project. There is discussion on utilizing the e-permit, place of use, and point of diversion conversion tools. And these tools are developed to do a download from the e-permit database in Excel and then map those records into GIS. These are 2 data sets where we have created statewide downloads, and the downloads were completed between 2018 and 2020, and your project manager can help you get this pre-populated data set from our office if it is needed for your project. This section will be helpful for understanding how the data set is developed, how to use it, and how to update the data set if needed, since it was a download that took place 2 to 3 years ago. The technical memo also describes base layers to be used to provide a consistent base for developing core data sets such as NHD, flow lines, streamlines, and the SEO divisions. The next section of the tech memo talks about feature mapping and attributes. This is the bulk of the standards. It talks about the data model, the core GIS data sets, and provides detail on the type of GIS features that are normally collected during Water Development Office project. Almost half of the memo consists of appendices. Appendix A is very important for setting up your project GIS. We've really worked to try to fine-tune and develop the domain values. Appendix A includes the domain values and descriptions and definitions. These are included as drop-downs in the map package templates, so that Appendix A is a great resource. Appendix B was provided by the State Engineer's Office. It provides guidelines for using their e-permit database to explore water right records. The SEO guidelines include tips for searching, definitions of terms, as well as permit code modifiers. Appendix C provides this more information on the e-permit conversion tools. And then finally, Appendix D is the instruction for developing linking fields between conveyances and structures. This document is designed to help you provide the deliverables which meet contract specifications so that we do not require resubmittal. So the next thing I would like to talk about is using our website to access the templates and tools. So all of the templates and tools and training materials, including this presentation, are available by navigating to the URL here or selecting GIS Data and Standards from the office's homepage. So here's a screenshot of the WWDC GIS Standards webpage. The yellow highlighted box, we'll talk about that first. So the first block of resources on our webpage includes links to the GIS standards. The technical memo that is shown on the right side of the screen can be accessed accessed here for download. We also have the GeoDatabase diagram, which I'll talk about on the next slide. This orientation, again, is being recorded, and both the slides and the webinar will be available via links. The GIS Framework Plan is a 2018 document, and it's a kind of a foundational document for the River Basin Planning Program, which provides the background, data gap analysis, recommendations for modernization, and it's a good document we refer to internally to keep us on track for modernizing our GIS. And then finally, all of the past presentations and standards documents are also available on the webpage. I do want to circle back and talk about the GeoDatabase diagram. Here's a screenshot here. It can be downloaded from the webpage or viewed from the webpage. It's a really, it looks a little bit like spaghetti, but it's a really useful document. It provides a schematic of all the feature classes, which are shown in blue, and the associated tables, which are shown in gold. All of the fields in the feature classes are listed here, and all the fields in the associated tables. It describes and defines the fields, so it will help you put in the correct attributes in your records. And then it also indicates which fields are domains and included as drop-downs in the GeoDatabase. Any of the linkages are illustrated in green or yellow highlight. So, we encourage you to print this off on large format paper or refer to it as you're populating the GIS. The next block of information includes accessing the GeoDatabase templates. The yellow arrow on the screen points to the diagram showing the feature classes. This should look familiar with the 4 data sets: assessment, hydrology, water projects, and water systems. On the far right side of the screen is a screenshot of the GeoDatabase structure in ARC catalog, which includes, again, those data sets: the assessment, hydrology, water projects, and water systems, and then the feature classes which fall underneath each one of those. The GeoDatabase shown on the right side is the master and includes all feature classes. Just want to note that not all projects will include or require all of those feature classes. So as an example, on the right side of the page here, this is a list of the featured classes that are required for an irrigation district master plan. The feature classes required for your specific type of project are described in section 4.3 of the technical memo. Feature classes required for all projects include study area, potential projects, place of use, and conveyances. Again, an example from the technical memo for irrigation master plans is shown here. The table lists each feature class required, provides a description of the intent of the feature class, and includes notes to help you populate the feature class. So as we see here, irrigation master plans will include 8 out of the 15 of the core feature classes. River basin planning and watershed studies include slightly more feature classes. Drinking water master plans and in-stream flow studies include less feature classes than the irrigation master plans. So the templates are available as map packages by project or study type via our website. On the right side of the page, you can view the 5 map packages by project type. Your template from the extracted map package will only include the feature classes from the GeoDatabase which are relative to your project. It will also include a boilerplate for the metadata, which you will update. There are 2 ways to open and use the map packages after downloading. You can double-click the map package, and the package will automatically default and extract itself to your C users folder and open in ArcMap. Packages are compatible with ArcMap 10.8 and previous versions. You can also run the extract package tool in Arc Toolbox from either ArcMap or Arc Catalog. This allows the map package to be extracted to a user-defined location versus the default location under C users. The paths and all the instructions for this are on page 8 of the technical memo. Finally, the last 2 sections of the web page, we talked about these, the common base data sets and the ArcGIS tools. Again, the base data sets include things like boundaries, streams and water bodies from NHD, stream names and division names, so there can be consistency in your project for that base data. And then the final thing is the download for the ArcGIS tools. So implementation of the standards has brought to light where we can fine-tune our processes. We're excited to be building the statewide data sets with your project data, and then we've also been going back to some of the old projects and mining previous project data. We've learned a lot with working with the incoming data sets, and I'll now pass this off to Mike Robertson, who will share some of the things that we have learned.
Okay, thanks, Mabel. Well, you've heard now about the updated resources that we have put together for you to generate deliverables that meet our standards. Hold on, I'll have to do this, admit. There we go. We've seen a noticeable improvement in deliverables in the last year as people have become more familiar with our expectations and used the resources that we provided to help you get everything right the first time. We are a few years into this process now of requiring specific standards and formats, and it really is to everyone's benefit in the long run. Of course, no one wants to have their draft GIS data returned for corrections, so we've set up this webinar and put together the resources to help you be successful with your data submittals the first time. However, we are still seeing a few common errors that I will address in this section, and we'll see if we can help minimize the need for any corrections going forward. Next slide. There we go. Great. So Mabel mentioned the 9 tips that we suggest on pages 2 and 3 of the Standards Tech Memo, and she's already emphasized all of these. The one I wanted to highlight again here is to use the correct project template. We do strongly recommend starting with that template when creating a new project rather than planning to load the data from your customized project into the template later. Of course, you're welcome to do it either way, but we just think that you might be able to avoid some potential headaches if you start with the correct format that's within the template. And this is an area where we've seen some confusion in the past. People have used the incorrect template, so be sure you're using the correct one for the project type that you're working on. So there's also what I'm calling a 10th unwritten tip, and that's to help really eliminate surprise at the end of the project. If you would take time to check in with questions with your project manager and let them know that you understand or are familiar with the GIS standards so that we can help avoid any pitfalls at the end of the project. Again, no one wants to see the data returned for corrections at the end of the project. Also, if you have a change in personnel with GIS responsibilities for your project, the new person can always review this recorded webinar and documents. And then we're also happy to work with anyone one-on-one with any questions they may have to help get them up to speed. So when your GIS data comes to one of our project managers, they're going to pull out a checklist to fill out, and these are the major points that they're going to focus on. First, does the deliverable have core data sets specific to the project type? In other words, did you use the correct template? All of the feature classes are supposed to be populated with data for your project. However, there may be some instances where no data are provided for a specific feature class. Your project manager should be aware of this, and there should be an understanding between you why the data are not included for that particular project. You will still turn in that feature class as part of the GeoDatabase that you deliver to our office. Just go ahead and include an explanation in the metadata for why that feature class is blank. And this will help make sure that everyone's on the same page and prevent additional questions and back and forth to figure out why it's blank and whether that was intentional, etc. Second, does each core feature class have all of the attributes and only the appropriate attributes? Again, not all of the attributes included in the template feature classes will be populated in every case, but the majority should be. Project managers will be looking for an explanation if important data attributes are left blank. Historically, we haven't had much data included in attributes with GIS features, but instead, people have just referred to that kind of data in reports. And we want that data to have a broader audience and be used for more than just this project. So we really want to attach as much attribute data to these spatial features as possible. Next is all metadata included. I'll talk quite a bit more about this on the next slide, but it's definitely a critical component of our expectations. Next is, did you submit as a GeoDatabase? Although we provide the templates as a map package, we actually prefer that the deliverables not be returned as a map package, but just as a GeoDatabase. Working with a map package adds a couple of extra steps on our end, and most of our project managers, well, they have varying levels of GIS experience. So we're trying not to complicate things if we can. So that's our preference. You can, of course, include an ArcMap or ArcPro package as well, if you would like to. And then finally on this slide, all maps prepared for the report should be submitted as a separate map file. And as Mabel mentioned, it can either be an MXD or an APRX, depending on what you're working with. Wording in your contract is that they should be an MXD, and that is still our preferred format. But we will accept ArcPro project if that's what you're using. And we all know that Esri is shifting that way pretty soon anyway, so we're going to have to adapt. Our next round of contracts will be modified to reflect that we will accept either of those options. So I mentioned that metadata is a big deal and a critical reason for the adoption of our standards in the first place. Anyone working in GIS knows how frustrating it is to get or find a data set with no metadata and then try and figure out if it's current or even usable. During development of the standards, we focused on the most important pieces rather than requiring full FGDC compliant metadata in order to balance the value with the amount of effort that it requires to put together. We didn't want this to be a huge burden, so we just need information on the 5 sections in the ArcGIS item description format. There are several places where you can find out exactly what we're looking for. In section 2.1 of the standards technical memo, you'll see that the table here shown on the left, which outlines each section and the components of that section. There's also a detailed example in the tech memo on page 5, which is filled out with for a hypothetical data set, so you can get a better sense of what goes where. And then we carried it over into the templates themselves by including both the prompts of what to include in brackets and also some example text. Just make sure that you replace the example text with your actual metadata. And just a reminder that, of course, we aren't looking for a standalone XML document. We do want the metadata incorporated into the GIS feature classes and data tables. So let's take a quick look at the 5 sections, still on this slide. And the tags section is largely pre-populated, but feel free to add more if you think additional terms would be helpful. The use limitations default language should be all you need in most cases, But again, you're welcome to add any language you may feel is necessary. We just don't want you to edit or delete the default language. The credits section is straightforward, so that really leaves just the summary and description that require a bit more work on your part, but hopefully still pretty straightforward with the example information that we provided. I do want to point out the yellow highlighted piece here on this slide. If you have added a linked table with extra attributes, we want you to spell out any data attributes that you have added in the description section. This is especially true for any coded values that you may have added. We want to make sure that we have a definition so that the next person to look at it knows what these attributes actually are. So what do you do if you get your data from another source and it has no metadata? Well, first you have to determine whether you can even trust the accuracy of those data. I mean, the whole point of metadata is to ensure validity. So you'll need to take time to verify the quality of that data set. And then second, if you do continue to use it, explain where you got it from, when you acquired the data, and acknowledge that despite your best efforts, you weren't able to track down any of the original metadata for it. We do still see some data sets coming into our office with missing metadata in some or all of the components. Others have sparse metadata that isn't nearly as useful as it could be. So we took time to build this example in every feature class and table so the prompts are right there when you go to fill it out. It may seem repetitive, but remember these feature classes and tables are likely to be separated in the future and not shared as one bundled package. So it is important that each piece carry the appropriate metadata to be able to trace back to the history of those data. Okay, in addition to metadata for the feature classes and tables, we also need metadata for individual features or records. That usually includes these 4 fields, although sometimes the last one, horizontal accuracy, is not required. When you do see that these fields are present in one of your feature classes, and tables, they're not optional, they do need to be populated. So we saw earlier in the presentation where to find your project contract ID. Again, it's not that number beginning with the RN. Contractor is intended to be the firm who creates and or edits the feature, and so that could either be the prime if they're doing the GIS work, or if they have a subcontractor, it would be the subcontractor that's listed here. Creation edit date, we opted not to maintain both a creator and an editor field and dates for each to try and cut down on the number of required fields. So the creator will populate all of these fields for the entire feature class or table when it's first created. But if at a later date someone makes a change to an individual feature or a group of features, then they will change the fields to reflect the edit date for the new condition. So the creation date will not be retained if and when edits are made. For horizontal accuracy, that's a coded value domain, so be sure to review the tech memo and to know which code that is appropriate for each feature. And then at the bottom here, we have one of our tips. Tip number 7 is assign an edit date to only those features that you change. So one good way to do this without having to manually change each record is to enable editor tracking. Many of you are probably familiar with this feature already, and it's a great way to ensure that those fields are updated appropriately. But be careful using this feature. Anytime you make a wholesale change to the entire layer, for instance, if you do a copy paste, it will update the editor and date fields for all of the features. So I recommend keeping the editor tracking off until you begin to make changes to individual features. Turn it on temporarily and then back off again when you're done with any changes. So this will help clearly distinguish which features have actually been changed in some way from those that were a result of a basic processing action applied to all the features. Okay, in a perfect world, we would have a template that has exactly all of the correct attributes for each feature class to match the data that you have for your project, and you can quickly load the data from your project one-to-one into the appropriate attributes. However, you are likely to have some data that don't match up exactly with the attributes in the template, and there is often some uncertainty about what to do in this situation. So the correct way to handle it depends on whether it's a core or auxiliary data layer that you're working with. So as Mabel described, if you're working with data that clearly do not fit into one of our core data sets that we've defined, then those are auxiliary data. These don't have any template layers, so all of the data fall outside of our predefined data attributes. Feature classes and tables will follow whatever format you feel is best suited to organize these data. You can submit the data within the same template GeoDatabase as one package and just include it as a separate feature class or table, or you can submit it in an entirely distinct GeoDatabase or even as standalone shapefiles. But remember, the auxiliary data do still have to have metadata. So if you're working with core data sets, then the requirements are much more specific. You should not include any extra attributes in the feature class outside of the predefined attributes. If there is not an appropriate attribute that corresponds to your data already in the feature class, it is possible that we have the data is supposed to go into one of our pre-designed data tables. So make sure to check those tables first. And that complex GeoDatabase diagram is a good bet for figuring out which tables connect to which feature classes. If you don't see an appropriate attribute in either the feature class or the existing table, then you'll need to create a project-specific table to house these extra data attributes. You see here on the right, you can see that here on the right in the catalog tree. You'll need to make sure you populate the attribute that enables the join, which we're generically calling the join ID in this table, since the template table could be used to attach extra data to any feature class. You don't have to create a relationship class with this table. And in fact, we've designed the entire model to work with just a basic ArcGIS license, which does not allow relationship classes. But you must ensure that the join is set up correctly to link these data to the correct features in the feature class. Remember to populate the metadata for the table, including information on the attributes that you added and any coded values. Okay, we'll walk through a quick example of this in action. So here is one of the feature classes from our model in blue on the upper left. It's the WWDO conveyance feature class with information on canals, ditches, pipelines, etc. So the convey ID field is the unique identifier, and there's a set of data attributes that are already included in the feature class. But if you have some additional attributes that don't fit in the feature class, you'll add them to a project-specific table. You assign the names for the additional attributes, but you need to include the convey ID in the table to link back to the appropriate feature in the feature class that you're adding the attributes to. This table includes the standard fields to track the origin of the data, including the contract ID, contractor, and creation edit date. You'll also indicate which feature class this table will link to in one of the attributes. So it is a little bit more work to organize the data this way rather than just tack on the extra attributes to the existing feature class. But we do it this way because it is very important that our template feature classes be maintained in the format that we created, so those data can be easily incorporated into the master GeoDatabase. We do want to be able to retain and include all important data, including attributes that we didn't anticipate when we designed the schema. And so this is the way that we came up with to keep these data, extra data attributes associated with the correct feature class and also facilitate data management on the back end. Our templates have names for each feature class and table that match the master GeoDatabase where the data will ultimately be compiled. You may have your own project naming conventions, but we want the deliverables to keep the same names for the feature classes and tables as they are in the template GeoDatabase that you're starting from. For example, the feature class WDO conveyance and one of its data tables, WS conveyance names, will be named the same in your deliverable as it is in the template. The exception is the project-specific table that we just talked about on the previous couple of slides. In the template, it has a generic name because it could be used to link data to any feature class. You'll need to rename it with the table name that identifies the feature class and data type, along with the project name and year of the project. You can see an example of this in the slide, and the naming convention is also spelled out in our pre-populated metadata for this table. So if you're creating one of these tables, you can find those details there when you begin. Keeping the same names also extends to the individual attributes. If the attributes or column headings differ, it makes the process of loading data into the master GeoDatabase more difficult. Your data may be called something different, but please keep the attribute names that we have in our templates and load your data into the one that it most closely fits. If you need to add some explanation about the differences in names or anything else, please add it to the description section of the metadata for that feature class or table. Obviously, field types need to remain the same in your templates as well. If you feel your data need to be a text versus a number field or vice versa, then you'll either have to adapt your data to fit our template, or you'll have to move that attribute into a project-specific table. So in two of our feature classes, the structures and conveyances, we have created unique ID fields. Other feature classes have natural unique identifiers, such as the NHD reach code, but there wasn't a good existing identifier for these data types. These IDs are the WWDO STRID and the convey ID fields for structures and conveyances, respectively. These fields have to be populated by you for each feature that you add. Originally, we had a complex formula for assigning these values that included which SEO division and district it was located in, a code that was associated with the drainage it was in, and then a unique number based on where in the drainage it was located. This value included a lot of information in the ID itself, and it would have been very useful. However, we found that it was just too much for a large project covering a significant number of features. So we decided to simplify this last year in 2020 and have you assign what we were calling a temporary ID value that includes your contract ID and a sequential number for successive records, with the intent that we would later assign a permanent ID value on our end. We decided that that was an unnecessary step, so now we've settled on having you assign a permanent ID, and it's still a combination of your contract ID plus a sequential number, but it has changed just slightly from the process that we described in our tech memo in 2020. So be sure to review the most recent tech memo, the version 3.1 that we just put together this year, to make sure that you assign these numbers correctly. Okay, finally, I just have a few miscellaneous items to mention. Make sure first that you find out if the project sponsor uses GIS already and what version of GIS or ArcGIS they are using. So our office, of course, is up to date on the latest version of ArcMap and ArcPro, so you can deliver GIS products in the latest version and we will be able to open it, no problem. However, if the sponsor uses an earlier version and you provide the products in the most up-to-date version, they won't be able to work with it. It is possible, of course, to save files in a format of earlier versions, so be sure to do that if necessary for the project sponsor's benefit. So another point about sponsors who use GIS, the Water Development Office, our format is set, and we have specific standards and formats that we require, as we've talked about today, so that we can compile statewide data sets. However, sponsors may use a different format and set of standards. We want the products you create to be useful to both or to the sponsor while also meeting our standards. If you have auxiliary data sets, that's no problem. Just make sure the format fits the sponsor's needs, since the Water Development allows auxiliary data to be submitted in any format, as long as you include metadata. Those data sets don't go into our compiled statewide layers. But for core data sets, you may need to provide the data in a format that most benefits the sponsor while also providing the data in the Water Development format. So this may require you to provide two sets of core data layers in some circumstances. All right, next, potential projects are set up as points. I believe Mabel mentioned this earlier, but if you are working with potential projects that are line features, you'll need to create a point layer using the first point in each line. And if you're working with potential projects that are polygons, create a point layer from the centroids. Please submit the original data, the lines or the polygon features, since those are important spatial features to identify the projects accurately. But for us to compile our single statewide layer of potential projects in the master GeoDatabase, we just want one point feature class of potential projects. Next, you may maintain several feature classes, one for each major feature type in a project area. A water master plan is a good example where you may have separate layers for valves, meters, hydrants, etc. But in our model, we've consolidated these distinct feature types into a single layer of structures. So you'll need to consolidate them for your GIS deliverable and then distinguish the various types using our attributes. Next, Mabel talked about this earlier, but remember the contract language provides clear guidance about what deliverables are required, such as map files for each map that you created for the report and other details. So be sure to review your contract carefully, and then contact one of us if there's any questions about or confusion about the contract or the language in the contract. And then last, I wanted to add in one more reminder about that GeoDatabase diagram, that's the place to see descriptions on each attribute in each feature class and table. So for instance, if you aren't sure what, say, the status attribute actually refers to, well, then check there for a description that can help you put the right data in the right fields. Okay, at this point, I just want to say thanks to everybody for participating in the webinar. We hope it will help generate and help you generate and submit deliverables correctly the first time. So today we discussed how our standards improve the usefulness of the data you prepare for water development projects and our goal of developing statewide data layers for these core water-related data sets. We've explained where to go to get all of the resources that you should need, including the template that you will use to get started on your project. And we've talked about the contract requirements and what our project managers will be looking for using their checklists, and some other things we've noticed from previous deliverables that will help you submit your GIS data successfully. So we will be happy to answer any questions that have been submitted via chat. I haven't been monitoring it, but if you've got questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. If we get through those, we'll unmute yourself and ask your questions that way if you'd like. And of course, you may have questions that come up later after you've digested all this and reviewed the supporting materials, and we're happy to address those questions as they come up. So feel free to reach out to us. Here is our contact information for Mabel and me, and then Tony Bergantino with Words is also listed, as he's been a huge contributor to the development and maintenance of our GeoDatabase model. And of course, Words can also help with any information on previous reports and data that you maybe need for your project. That's all I have.